and welcome everyone. My name is Stephen Goldberg of Optimus Performance, bringing you practical tips and ideas on leadership, team development, and employee performance in the workplace. And as you can see, I have a special guest with me today, Richard Shaull, who's the CEO and co-founder of Unleashed CEO. And we're going to talk about unleashing your CEO that's waiting inside of you to jump out and grow a fantastic company. So I'll introduce Richard, and then we'll hear what he has to say. So after two of his businesses nearly killed him, wow, Richard made it his mission to ensure other entrepreneurs don't go through the same struggles alone. To do this, he founded or co-founded Unleashed CEO, which helps visionary entrepreneurs scale with time, freedom, scale time or have time, I guess, and the freedom by recruiting and training a self-managing leadership team. Their proven process is guaranteed to free up 30 hours per week for the CEO to focus on growth, more time with family, or better yet, both. Richard's vision is to build a global tribe of 10,000 unleashed CEOs and help them achieve their big impact vision. Well, that's some major goal you have there, Richard. And where are you? Where are we talking to you from? Where are you sitting right now?
I'm coming to you guys from Hazlet, Michigan. Michigan happens to be the only state where I can point to my hand and show you where I am. So we're just right about here in the Mitten State. And it is freezing cold outside, but hey, we're smitten with the mitten, frozen, chosen, as we like to say out here, and we love it.
Yeah, we're pretty cold up here in Montreal. We're showing with the wind chill minus 22 Celsius. So when you go for a walk, you feel that wind. So let's jump into some of the questions. The first one I have is who, you mentioned, and I introduced you, that you're a former CEO that almost killed you. Maybe tell us a little bit about that. Give us a little bit of your background, how you got to be where you are today, because that's an interesting introduction. So I'd like you to elaborate a little bit on that.
Sure, I'd love to. Yeah, so I for me, man, it comes back to the moment where I was in my first year of marriage, running two companies at the time, and I remember coming home, avoiding my wife, and slipping into the spare room that was my office in our home, and curling up in a fetal position in the corner and crying out to God for help. That was literally what life was like at that moment. At the time, we literally had we'd been defrauded by the state government. We had project managers literally leave at ongoing projects, leaving no one to oversee the crews. We had storms that rolled through and did multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars in damage to our properties that our insurance company was attempting to deny the claims for. We had angel investors who were threatening to pull out. We were getting sued by a former partner who had actually stolen money from us, and then they had the audacity to sue us. So needless to say, it was absolutely a mess. And it ultimately came back to me, as the leader, as the CEO. And I just remember, man, even in that moment, questioning whether I had what it took to actually be a CEO of a growing company. And even if I was an entrepreneur, I thought maybe I'd just gotten lucky or made it up or something. Yeah, man, that's kind of where this journey of what we call Unleashed CEO actually started for me, because I remember thinking at the time, man, nobody should have to go through this alone. Nobody should have to feel as alone as I feel right now. And it's been interesting to talk to so many other business owners who have faced that same pivotal moment, right? That same identity crisis where they're like, man, I know I'm an entrepreneur, I can sell, I can market, but when it comes to actually building something that's scalable, deep down, can I do this? Do I have what it takes? And, that's a big part of what kind of drives me today and why we've built the company we've built.
Yeah, well, I can relate because I grew up in a family business, and at times I suffered through some pretty tough challenges as well, and didn't really like all the stuff that I had to do. What business were you in at that time? What was it?
So I had a wealth management and financial services firm. And then from that, we launched an REIT, which was specifically focused on a buy and hold real estate acquisition strategy in kind of one of the top 10 rebound markets after the 2008 crash.
Okay. So you just described the challenges that you faced. How would you describe, now that you changed seats and you're helping people that suffer from a similar symptoms or problem get out of that, how would you describe your ideal client or the problem that they face right now, the people that you work with? How would you describe it from the outside now, looking into their problem?
Yeah, I think there's a couple characteristics. So one is they're visionary entrepreneurs. So there's a lot of different types of entrepreneurs out there, and most people don't realize that. There's a type of entrepreneur who, came out of corporate management and they kind of see an opportunity and seize it, and they kind of already know the industry and they build something that they're very familiar with at some level. But visionary entrepreneurs are disruptive, right? They're ideators, they're creators. It doesn't even mean you have to be in some innovative industry. I've met visionaries in just about every industry, but they have big, hairy, audacious goals, right? They're ambitious. They want to build something, large and scalable that makes a big impact and a big profit. But they're also at the core, they're entrepreneurs, right? They love sales. They love marketing. They love building things from the ground up. They're typically high quick starts. And, all of those things are tremendous strengths in the early days of a company, right? It's oftentimes the charge that's needed to get the company off the ground. But what I found is that one of the most difficult transitions for those people to make is actually going from entrepreneur to CEO. It's really, really difficult because the same things that got you here, to some level of success are the things that hold you back from the next level of success. And as the business scales, these poor entrepreneurs find themselves playing chief everything officer, right? They're sitting in multiple executive leadership and management hats. They're, as someone coined the phrase, I don't even remember who, wearing all the hats, spinning all the plates. And they're just spending way too much time in their companies doing things they don't love and aren't great at. And as a result of that, the business oftentimes ends up slowing in its growth because the CEO isn't focused on growth. They're focused on maintenance and the day-to-day and putting out fires. And so that's the typical place that most of the people we work with and a lot of people we talk to who've hit that point, that's where they're at. And that's the kind of the crisis they're in, so to speak. So
if we were looking at this from the outside, sort of like a bird's eye view of what they would be suffering from, what are those symptoms? What are those signs that we would be seeing happening in these types of companies with these visionary type creative leaders?
Yeah. So it's funny when you said bird's eye view, I literally pictured, you're at 30,000 feet looking down on the business and, the entire thing looks like an atom. And at the center of the atom is the nucleus, is the entrepreneur themselves, right? They are the center of their business and everything orbits around them. So we call that an owner-centric structure, right? Where it's like every major function of the business, even if you've sort of delegated it, right? You have a leader or a manager, ultimately still ends up coming back to you, right? When the decision needs to be made, when the call needs to be made, when the fire needs to be put out, it comes back to you. It lands back in your lap. And so I think there's an owner-centric structure, which was kind of built by necessity because the business was your baby and you did sort of build every piece of it. But now you become its greatest bottleneck where everything's dependent on you. And, as a result of that owner-centric structure, the CEO really doesn't have any time freedom, or at the very least, they don't have time to actually think and work on the business and do some of the things they're really great at, like ideating and creating and expanding and networking and selling. Instead, they're stuck in the weeds, right? They're unable to focus on growth. They're putting out fires when they're home with their family. And maybe they've even started to lose a little bit of their passion and drive for what they do. because it just feels like a grind.
And so what do they, before you step in and help them resolve these issues, what typically do they try and do on their own to fix them that doesn't work?
Oh man, this is a fun one. And everybody's different. Everybody has their own, homebrewed remedy for this issue. But I'll tell you a couple of the most common things I see visionary entrepreneurs do, some of which have merit and some of which maybe have less merit. So one thing I watch all the time is, entrepreneurs who get bored and who get stuck in this, rather than slowing down and trying to fix it, they just start something new. So you'll find people like me who have issues in their existing business. They get bored and tired and kind of burned out. And so out of a desire to re-engage that creative part of who they are, they just start something new. They start another business, which only compounds the problem in the long term. But they start something else, right? They start something new. Another breed of people, they start exploring selling their business, right? They're like, can I sell? Which in most cases, they really can't get the true value of what they've put in because the business is so dependent on them. But it is something they're maybe thinking about, exploring. Another thing that, oftentimes I hear people talk about is, outsourcing. Buzzwords like systems get thrown around. And so they're researching software and they're trying to look into hiring VAs or virtual assistants or outsourcing or third parties. And that has a ton of value. But one of the things I've found is that sometimes as the entrepreneur, your management capacity is already tapped out. Your brain power is tapped out. And so just adding more hands to the business just requires more capacity from the brain to direct the hands, so to speak. And so it doesn't actually solve the root issue, right? You might have more kind of frontline boots on the ground help, but those are more people and more relationships that still have to be managed well and led well. And at a certain point, you run out of decision-making capacity. You run out of leadership and management capacity, especially for entrepreneurs who oftentimes just flat on it, being brutally honest, are not that great of managers anyways. It's just not one of their unique abilities. So those are a couple of things that I see. So
what is the solution, whether it's them figuring it out on their own or obviously bringing you in with your approach, I guess, is one of the solutions. But what is that solution? What needs to happen for that, I guess, CEO to get off of that treadmill and that's going nowhere, just building up that pressure inside? What has to happen for that business to now grow and for him to free himself and gain those 30 hours a week?
Yeah, I think the way I would frame it, Stephen, from my experience is there's sort of a philosophy and then there's a journey. And the philosophy is easy to say, but the journey requires quite a bit of perseverance, right? And quite a bit of, courage to undertake. The philosophy is the number one thing that I've seen successful entrepreneurs who make the shift from entrepreneur to CEO do is focus on their strengths and hire out their constraints, right? And what I mean by that is really come to grips with what are the few key things that they do to drive growth for the company. Get 100% committed to sitting in those seats primarily and at some point only. And then from that point, get committed to finding, attracting, and empowering people who have the opposite strengths that you do, who actually have strengths where you are weak. And that starts obviously with acknowledging and owning that you have some areas you're weak in your business, which not everybody has the humility to fully admit. But I think that, the great CEOs and leaders that I know are so aware of what they're good at, and they focus just on that. And then they surround themselves with really capable people who are great at the things they're not great at. I think that's the philosophy, right? And in theory, that sounds really easy. And then there's the journey, and the journey is, it takes courage. So, from the journey side, what I would say is really, in my experience, most companies, it can be a little smaller, but most companies that are somewhere between 1 to 10 million in revenue, don't have a true, fully equipped and empowered self-managing leadership team, right? There's companies I've worked with up to 100 million who don't have that in place and who are still kind of trying to figure that out. And there are companies that are smaller but have a high growth curve that are starting to figure that out as well. But typically it's kind of in that space where you really, as the CEO, your number one job is to recruit and train a leadership team for your company, right? And it's, Dan Sullivan said it through his famous book, Who Not How, right? You don't need to ask the question, how do I do this? You need to figure out who can help me do this. In Good to Great, Jim Collins says, who before what, right? Before you figure out what your company needs to do to go from good to great, it actually, the more important question is, who do I need? Who can help me figure out what we need to do to get to the next level? The same principles are found in just about every great business book, but the journey is difficult. It requires courage. It requires capital. It requires an admission of weakness. And at some level, it requires even an identity shift where you're willing to let your baby go and entrust it to some other really capable people to come in and take care of it. And I think that's a journey for a lot of entrepreneurs.
Yeah, so that brings up an interesting question for me. You mentioned these books and these great leaders, and you also use the word courage. So if all this knowledge is already there, I made videos about this in these books, why can't a CEO in this situation just read that and then implement it? And you said it takes courage. So it sounds like there's a fear that holds them back to applying that knowledge. Can you talk about that a little bit?
It's a really, really good thing to bring up, Stephen. It's a great question. And I think, many people listening to this, they're familiar with your brand, and we work with clients on some similar things, but we have some different nuances to how we approach the same problem. And I know for a lot of clients who I'm sure you work with, it comes down to, number one, I may understand it in theory, but am I in practice an expert at this? And for most entrepreneurs, they've never gone there before, right? So it's like to go somewhere you've never gone before without a guide feels foolish, right? It feels a little foolhardy, especially when there's the future of your company and probably a decent amount of capital involved in making that jump. So I think that's one thing is really getting expert guidance that you just can't get from a one-dimensional book, right? Lit into a broad group of people. But I think the other point, man, you brought up is maybe even more important because that's the logical side, right? Well, I'm paying for expert advice. The other side, man, is the where your treasure is, there your heart is also. And I tell people all the time, like, you don't need to hire us, but you should hire somebody, because where your treasure is, your heart is. And when you invest in something, when you kind of plant a flag in the sand and go, I am going to make this leap. When you put your money where your mouth is, your actions, your heart follows. You've kind of created a built-in accountability mechanism for yourself, which I think is really, really powerful.
That's a good way of putting it. So what can, you provide a lot of good information. What could somebody do? What advice could you give somebody who's in this situation right now, wanting to free themselves, wanting to get out of this, I guess, constant, pedaling and going nowhere type situation? What can they do? What one thing can you advice could you give that they could implement right now if they wanted to, if they had the courage?
If they had the courage. Yeah. I mean, I think the simplest thing that I recommend most entrepreneurs do is start by getting clear about what you are great at and love to do within your business and what you are not great at and don't love to do. Because in that simple exercise, I mean, you can literally take a sheet of paper and write on one side all the stuff that you love to do and are great at. And that's what I call your superpower. You can literally flip the page over and write on the other side all the stuff you don't love to do and aren't great at. And believe it or not, that other side of the paper starts to inform who you need to hire first, who you need to take action on first. In some cases, it might be an executive administrator. For some people, it might be a general manager. For some people, it might be a COO or a CFO, or, and in some cases, it might be a combination of things. But I think in principle, if you can get really clear about like, what are my true strengths that if I focused on would drive growth for our business and drive value for our business, and that fire me up, that I love to do. And then what are the things that I really do need to delegate because they're constraints for our company and I'm just not that good at them. I think that clarity can also help with the courage, as you said, where it's like, okay, at least I know that I'm not just throwing stuff against the wall to see what sticks. I'm truly identifying my strengths and weaknesses and then hiring around my weaknesses.
Cool. So what is one resource you could provide people that would help them in this situation? I think you said prior to our call that you had a training that people can check out and learn more about, or use as a tool and also learn more about you.
Yeah.
Maybe
so
tell me about that.
We've queued that up for your audience. And Stephen, I just want to say thank you so much for allowing us to have this conversation. We've been having this offline, and I think it's such an important one for entrepreneurs. So yeah, we put together a short video demo that basically outlines kind of our process, how we think about recruiting and training an entrepreneurial leadership team to actually free up the CEO's time to focus on growth. And you can go to, if you type in the web browser, go.unleashed.ceo/training. That's go.unleashed.ceo/training. You can get it there. You can also just go to our website. And if you know how to click around, you can go to unleashed.ceo and find some other resources there as well. Unleashed.ceo. There's no com.com or anything like that. It's just unleashed.ceo. So, and that will give you a really clear picture, I think, into some of the tools and frameworks and methodologies we use. In about 12 minutes, it'll download quite a bit about what that journey looks like to recruit and train that entrepreneurial leadership team you need.
Well, that's great. I'll put the link in the description of this video or the show notes on this will also be published as a podcast. And I'll also add this in post to the screen, so it should come up while you were speaking. That's great. I'm going to check it out. I'm interested in seeing what I can learn from this, because I work with CEOs and entrepreneurs too. And like you said, probably in a different approach, different way of doing it, or a varied way. But I guess my last question is, what's the one question that I should have asked you that would give great value to our audience that I didn't ask you?
Yeah, and now we're going to get into the secret sauce, as we call it.
Oh.
So the question I would have asked is, what is the secret to recruiting a self-managing leadership team? And we talked about the philosophy and we talked about the journey, but if there's one secret sauce element that we've found across helping multiple hundreds of entrepreneurs make this transformation and take this journey, it is the power of an entrepreneurial vision. And what I think people don't realize when they're trying to hire and recruit, and this isn't just for the leadership team, it's really for the company as a whole, but it's especially applicable when you're trying to hire great leaders, is most of the factors are against you, not in your favor when it comes to hiring talent as an entrepreneurial company. You don't have the big benefits package. You may not be able to pay as much as the big corporate guy. You're a little less structured. You're a little more risky, right? All of that. What you do have that is so powerful if leveraged well is an entrepreneurial vision. And what I tell entrepreneurs all the time is, if you can figure out as the CEO how to weaponize that vision, where it's so clear and so compelling and can be communicated with such clarity that when people hear it, it pierces their hearts and makes them want to be a part of what you're doing, you are so far ahead of most workplaces in America, right? I cannot overemphasize enough the importance of a really clear, weaponized vision and culture that's harnessed not just as an internal tool for the people you've already hired, but leveraged as an external recruiting tool to actually get A-player talent interested in your opportunity, in your company. And I think, again, the secret sauce of our process, why we've been able to place hundreds of really, really, really talented people in entrepreneurial companies, sometimes with them accepting less pay upfront, is because they see the opportunity to get in the ground floor and truly be part of contributing to something that grows and scales and makes a huge impact. And that's incredibly powerful.
Yeah, that is. And it's a very interesting question that you brought up and answered. And I had actually just made a video based on research done by Forrester Research about why people are changing jobs, especially at this time where they've had time during the pandemic to sit back and question what they want. And one of the big things that people are looking for was having a sense that they're contributing to something. And the more powerful that CEO can embrace people in his vision and have them feel like they can contribute, the more interesting or attractive that would be to people.
You nailed
it. And it overshadows money, is what they were saying in the study as well.
Which I have a hard time getting entrepreneurs to believe, but it's true. And we've seen it time and time again with clients.
Right. Well, that was great. Thank you so much, Richard, for joining me today. And you gave a lot of great, valuable information. And again, I'll put a link to this free training that people can go in. It's a free video training that you mentioned. Take about 12 minutes. I'm going to check it out for sure. Thank you for joining me on the show today. For everyone listening, I'm doing more and more of these guest interviews that's packed with great information. There's also the podcast version I mentioned. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please do so now and turn on notifications so you get news of new videos. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk again soon. Thank you, Richard.
It was an honor and a privilege, Stephen.